Welcome to the Businesses Start Here podcast, hosted by David Vigliotti and Vigliotti and Associates. We're here to talk with business owners and business experts to inspire and encourage entrepreneurs.
Hello and welcome back to the Businesses Start Here podcast. We are very excited today to have the founder of Lilly Press in Rockville, Maryland with us, Susan Goldman. Again, I'd say it all the time when I have people that I haven't met before on the podcast, but these are the most fun ones and most exciting because we get to learn a lot about each other today. So Susan, thanks for joining us. I'm excited to get to know you.
Nice to meet you too.
Thanks. So Susan, tell us about yourself, really just the open canvas for you today. So tell us about yourself and how you got to where you are.
Well, I'm an artist and I have been practicing. I'm a printmaker, which is I do everything print oriented from digital to traditional hand printing in the fine art world. And I've been at this for almost, 40 plus years. And I was, throughout my life, I've done a lot of different jobs related to art, but I've always stayed within the art field. And I've taught at university levels, I've taught children, I've taught at-risk youth, different types of communities. And I think back in the day when I was first starting out, I have a Master of Fine Arts degree from Arizona State University and a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Indiana University in Bloomington. I'm originally from Cincinnati, Ohio, but I've always had my hand in different areas of art and sustained my love and passion for art by always sticking to working within art. Mm-hmm. And so I'm one of those people that after I graduated from Arizona State University, a lot of people back in the day, I graduated in the 80s where academia was a lot healthier in terms of job security and so forth. But I really didn't want to go into full-time teaching out into remote areas. I was in Arizona in Phoenix, and I decided to stick with art. So I had a lot of different jobs, like teaching at community colleges, working for the Arizona Commission on the Arts, teaching kids in schools. I taught it part-time in high school. So I thought, I'll have time to do my work, but I had several, 3 part-time jobs juggling, thinking I wanted to be independent. And it worked, I did it. But, I'm really glad I did it that way. I think today the landscape of the job market is somewhat like that for so many young people. They have multiple part-time employment jobs as opposed to one solid one because everything has shifted. So
you're in the gig economy before the gig economy was cool.
I was already doing it, man. Yes. I think a lot of artists, creative people's creatives do that. But when I look back on it, that's kind of my track.
I think it fits the artist and creative personality much better though, because staying at one job for a long period of time doesn't satisfy your creative needs, I would assume.
Well, everyone's different. So that's the thing, I always tell myself and my children and a lot of my students, that you have to kind of put your blinders on and you can't allow other people's it's like someone said to me once, like Olympic swimmers, when they're swimming a race, they don't look to side, they just go forward. And a good friend of mine who is an artist, he said, you have to be like a shark. You have to keep moving. If you stop, you're dead. So that's kind of been a little bit of my credo to keep my focus and it was because I loved it. And I think a lot of times people, like specifically visual artists and I guess performing artists, we resort to teaching. Like academia was a solid track for a number of years, from the 1940s forward, when Master of Fine Arts degrees were established and teaching jobs were a real viable way for artists to teach, have the summers off or have, flexibility to actually create their work.
Right.
But it's not like that anymore. It's actually pretty challenging.
Yeah. So a couple of things that you said I wanted to talk about that I think just from the brief time we've talked, I think are part of the key to your success in the early years as well as when you start a business, but keeping your blinders on and focusing on yourself and not the competition or the people around you, and keep moving. Um, so tell me a little bit about how you feel like those two things have impacted your career trajectory and then helped you when you started your business.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I am competitive by nature. I didn't think I was. I come off as a very, people always go, "Oh, you're so sweet." I'm a nice person and I'm a generous person. But I'm also, I realize I am competitive,
Yeah.
and, competition is a friend of mine, an advisor. Competition is a tool for improvement. It doesn't have to be a bad thing, but you're like looking over and saying, well, how are they doing that? And how does that,
Right.
and you can, when someone's successful that you respect or you look up to or you want to be like, you kind of look, well, what is it they're doing that makes it happen for them? And not everything always fits a person, but
Right.
in back to your question, I taught and I stayed within the nonprofit world of studios. There's a lot of printmaking, which is a particular artwork that I'm involved in, is actually a community type of art. It's like theater in a way. You need other people. You need a studio with a printing press. A lot of people can't afford presses when they're coming out of school, so they'll
Right.
go to centers and they'll work where they can get employment and they can also have access to the tools. So when I worked in a place called Pyramid Atlantic, which was a nonprofit center in Maryland outside of DC. And at the time, this was in the early 90s, after I got married and left Arizona and we moved east because my husband is an architect and he went back to get an MBA at American University.
Okay.
And so I looked for places to work in the city. And fortunately, I landed into a place that was sort of like an interim place for people out of school, not quite on their own. And you could work with, they had visiting artists and they had workshops for children. And, so it afforded me a really wonderful community within the DC area. So I started building relationships from that place. And I was also teaching at MICA, which is an art school in Baltimore. I
Mhm.
taught all over. I called myself a Rhodes Scholar, ROAD, is the adjunct junkie. I always had adjunct part-time teaching positions.
Yeah.
So that kind of streamlined me into the community in a positive way. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I would say like I built relationships, but it took time. And I
Yeah.
ended up eventually teaching full-time, not full-time, well, they never gave me full-time, but it was like at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. I taught for 12 years as an adjunct. Um, and then finally I received a lot of, my work began to take off in terms of selling it. And I ended up with the Printmaking Legacy Project, which is another part of me that you have across the screen. It's a 501c3. I have a nonprofit. Lilly Press is for profit, but Printmaking
Okay.
Legacy Project, it came out of a project where I was curious why printmaking was so strong in the Midwest of America. And it led to a lot of research, which is a whole nother bag of worms. But I got a big National Endowment for the Arts grant and
Oh,
was
great.
able to really sink into this documentary work. And I was like, I just couldn't teach anymore. I think I had reached a point where, this university wasn't real supportive of me. And also, it was just time to move on to not teaching, but to actually full-time practice in my studio.
Yeah. So you left the teaching job, all the teaching jobs,
Yeah.
to work on your craft.
Right.
Was it, and you said you picked up momentum. So was it a big jump for you, or was it just kind of the natural progression of refining yourself and your craft?
Well, I mean, it was a natural progression. I mean, I think, everybody has a different path, but I fortunately had built a kind of a client base over the years from working at different working at the university, because we had a visiting artist program and we brought people in, and plus this other entity, Pyramid Atlantic, I became a printer there. Master printer is kind of a loaded word, but I ended up having people that reached out to me and said, I want to print with you. And so it worked out that I was able to have people work in my studio. So I'm like a one-on-one personal trainer. So if you wanted to, if you wanted to come and make prints, I have a fee schedule, and I can hire. I have a lot of assistants, which are kids that are kind of out of the university in interim places. So I can hire part-time teams that come in and we execute projects. So it just has blossomed. And then my own work, as a result, I had time to really put myself out into the marketplace. And
Right.
so.
So if you can, I think people may have a different picture in mind when they hear printmaking. A lot of people, I think, may think of like a commercial printer that does advertising and marketing, and obviously that's not what you do. Tell us a little bit about what it is that you do. That way we can have the right frame of mind on your service.
So a lot of fine artists or artists that are painters or sculptors and printmakers, they come to me if they need help creating a body of work, like we call it an edition, a series of prints. So an edition might be anywhere from unique impressions, like one of a kind, to up to maybe 40, in the suite of prints. And I do everything like silkscreen and etching, like, let me show you my etchings. I tell people it's like the old way engravings, they used to print money. I would tell kids, like, what is printmaking? Well, you make multiples, it's copies, and you create certain matrices or ways that an artist can make an image over and over again. But they're limited, so they're not like an NFT, which is a whole nother thing that I'm curious about. But it's that kind of an idea. Like it's sometimes artists have large paintings that are very expensive, so they can make works on paper that are more affordable, and people can sell them and purchase their work. But I do everything in my studio from the traditional old-fashioned way that Albrecht Dürer printed engravings. Everybody knows the four men of the Apocalypse, the writer.
Right.
So that's a famous engraving that was carved from wood, and it was printed. So like in the olden days, people would go to religious in Germany, they couldn't see somebody speak, or the church could print these posters, but they were woodcuts, so people could spread the word of saints and all those kinds of things. So it's a multiple. It's a way of communicating, and it's a way that you can reach a lot of people. So I do everything from, like, on my printing press, traditional printing. I also do digital printing. I have an Epson 9890. I do digital printing, so I can produce. But it's done on like fine art German paper, so it's not like a poster, so it's sort of specialized. But so I do all of that.
Yeah. Okay. Using that German precision. That's great. So you built the business really on relationships, is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, those are the best businesses to build, because the transaction, like if you go to Walmart, I'm not loyal to Walmart because there's somebody there. I'm probably not loyal to Walmart, actually. But if I go to Walmart, it's because they have a certain thing that I want at the price that I want. People come to you because of the relationship they have with you and the expertise that you have. And there's something to be said for, you can't grow past yourself, obviously. To a point, you said you have team recent graduates, I think is what you said, but there's only so much capacity. But I think it keeps you in the part that you're passionate about in your case.
Right. Well, that's true. I mean, I've built a reputation. I'm a known quantity within the community. I kind of am amazed at myself, because people look at me and they go, people always say, you always are doing so much. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I mean, this is the way I've always been. I've always kind of hustled, but I love what I do. They say if you love what you do, you never You never work a day in your life. I mean, I love it. And I think a lot of artists, visual artists, I know a lot, I have a lot of colleagues that are in academia, and I really think, there's only a limited amount of money you can make as an academic. There's a salary, there's competition, and, the other thing too is over the years, well, I think it's been true, a lot of companies, I think, where there's no loyalty, they get new administrators in any business. I think, you get new people in that like don't respect what happened earlier and don't
Right.
that, and then someone new comes in and wants to change everything. I've been around, and I'm older. I mean, I'm kind of looking at the world now like, wow, going, what is going on? Like, how fast is it happening that fast as I think it is, or is it me? But I do have a reputation of producing very fine quality, and I am very, I'm easy to work with. People like to work with me, and and I have repeat customers. So I have repeat clients that I have engaged over the years. One woman for 10 years comes like 5 or 6 times a year. We produce her woodcuts, and people return back to me. And then, the other thing too within the art market is that there are artists that are very prominent that command good pricing within their work. So part of my practice, which I've learned over the years, is, if you came to print for me, I retain a portion of what I print besides being paid a fee. And every arrangement is different because some artists, how do I finance my projects? Well, number one, the artist can pay me outright for everything. Sometimes we co-publish, we'll 50-50 it. And some artists I will publish completely on my own because I know that I can sell their work later. I mean, I wasn't intending that, but it's really true. There's this different tiers of the market. And then I've been selling my own work quite a bit. I mean, all through COVID, I was amazed. I had these huge projects, which I was like, I can't believe it. Sometimes you're like, is this really happening? But, it's like my husband and I joke about this movie, the movie City Slickers.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know that Jack Palance plays Curly, the cowboy that dies on the rock? And so Billy Crystal's like, what's the meaning of life, Curly? And he goes, just one thing. And then he dies, right? But the thing is, stay your course.
Yeah.
Because if you're spread around, I mean, that's just one opinion, but it is true if it's working.
Yeah. And that's what I've found with a lot of businesses, especially recently, that the more focused you get, you feel like you may be limiting yourself and as far as potential clients or just volume that you can do. But it actually makes you, speaking from a purely profit standpoint, it makes you much more profitable because you can start charging a higher rate. You can have less customers, so you have less overhead expenses, and you have a better quality of life because if you're charging 10 customers $1,000 versus one customer 10,000, that's only one relationship you have to manage. It makes things much easier if you can really focus in on the one thing that you're good at. There's a book I read once, kind of stealing the idea a little bit, called The One Thing.
Oh, okay.
It's more about like productivity. It's saying the whole point of the book can be summed up in like one sentence. What's the one thing you can do today that will make everything else you do either not needed or easier? And I think in this case, what's the one thing you can do that you're the only person you can do that can do it the way you can do it?
Right. And I mean, and it takes time. That's the other thing. I mean, I remember when I first moved to Washington, there was a fabulous artist that I worked with named Pasita Abad. She was a Filipino artist who was in Washington, and she was just amazing. And we first got here, people were they're very different than in the West. In the West, everyone was a bit more friendly. And we came here like, was something wrong with us? People aren't, so welcoming. It took a little while, but she was very generous and her husband was lovely. And she invited us, my husband and I, to her home for dinner. And it was like the coolest house because it was like, it had, Philippine sculptures and rugs, and we sat on the floor and we ate and drank. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. And I was like, oh, how did you do this? And she goes, Susan, this takes time.
Right.
It takes time to build your environment. And I think that, I think today is really challenging because people have a lower tolerance for patience and time. Yep. Everything is so quick. And I think, it's this whole, the internet has affected us in positive ways, but also negative where, there's another great comedian named Tom Papa. I don't know if you know of him.
Yeah.
We love him. So he has this whole bit about, oh, everybody's posting on social media. Their life is so wonderful, And he's like, well, they might be somewhere exotic, but they're probably having trouble, the atheist thing, I didn't agree with them. So like the illusion that everybody's life is better than yours because people have this false, it's a false, it can't be sustained. Everybody goes up and down. I've had challenges and, but you just kind of keep going and have good people around you.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time in general because I think I've heard it called the microwave generation, right? So you're used to thinking of a baked potato. You used to have to bake it in the oven for 30, 35 minutes. Now you can have a baked potato in 2 minutes.
Right.
So in general, just people's attention span and their patience, like you said, is just not there anymore. And I feel it myself with our business sometimes because even though I know that basically the first 5 years is where it takes at least 5 years for things to really be established. And we're just, we'll be coming up on that in about 6 months here. But I wanted it established day one, and that's not at all where we were. And what I tell people a lot is you have to be aggressive in your actions, but patient in your expectations. Because if you get patient in your actions as well, then it's going to take twice as long. But if you're aggressive in your actions and aggressive in your patience, then you're just going to be frustrated the whole time that you have your business or in whatever you're doing because things just take time.
Yeah. Well, and so like my particular printmaking as a printmaker, Lilly Press, like I'm a service industry. A lot of artists are completely, there's studios and they have, they're totally focused on their own work only. And I focus on different people. But the other thing too is like, what's interesting is like, artists have had business studios forever, like from the Renaissance to, like Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo. Those guys had a whole studio of people that like they walked around and checked the project. They didn't fabricate everything, but their name went on it, you see.
Okay.
So it's like Andy Warhol had what he called the factory, where he had people producing his work. And it's very big in the art world today. They're like industries. They're, and I think what's great about this computer digital age is that, there's a lot more independence. You're not reliant on a company. You can be your own person because you can market, you can bypass a lot of, older business practices aren't applicable because there's competition. I can make my own films myself. I don't have to go to a video place and have somebody do it for me. I can produce, I've learned how to produce things myself. And so in that way, I think it's terrific because there's so much opportunity for young people and young entrepreneurs. But, I think, as I say, it's just a rapid world we live in. It's fast.
Yeah. I think it's a double-edged sword too, because yes, you need it's good to have the ability to do it yourself, but that leads to probably more creativity. But I think it also, you're going to have to learn the mistakes sometimes the hard way because you don't have I don't think relationships are what they used to be.
Yeah.
I think people used to, even just thinking about like going to the office, not that I think that is the best thing for people. I think there's some hybrid that's better, but the collaboration isn't there as much as it used to be.
Right. That's really true because I have a lot of friends in like public radio here and all over the country. But so, I mean, going to a place to work is important. I mean, I also, two comments, it's important. If you can't do it yourself, I find someone who can. Because I can't do Photoshop and I can't do video editing on my own, but I have a person, he was a former student who's around my age, and he's become like my senior assistant. And also, but it is true, the camaraderie and the creative, synergy that you get from walking down the hall and talking to somebody, I think that's really missing right now because of COVID. I think set a lot of into that way, but it is important to have other people in like a team, small team,
Yeah.
or you can independent contract people when I need.
Yeah. So one thing you mentioned is that you are an artist yourself and you're working with artists. How has those relationships and working with other artists impacted your personal art?
Well, I mean, I tend to work with, I've had a great love affair with older artists, the elder community. For some reason, I've always had very mentors that were 20 years older than me through my life. And I also have a lot of friends that weren't just artists, but like when we first moved to Washington, I befriended a woman in our apartment building who was 20 years older, but she wasn't like a grandmother. She was like my girlfriend, but she was wise and it was good counsel. And I find that, and I've had a lot of beautiful relationships with older artists, and they've taught me a lot about, how to handle the world, because I think sometimes when you're younger, I think people discard elder people, and I think they're a trove of treasure of work and support, and they can calm you down when you're like, oh my God, I'm so stressed out. And I'm like, oh dear, sit down and tell me about, what's going on. Cause I think, that's really important. So guidance that way. So in that way, and I've actually, made art for these artists too. I've also, a part of the Printmaking Legacy Project is I'm doing documentaries on a lot of these artists. If you go to the Printmaking Legacy website and you look under documentaries, you can click and there's different, like they're about 12-minute interviews with different artists that are kind of like archives of people that have gone before. And so that's where I think in my practice, that's affected me the most. And I also have artists that I work with because no one job is ever the same. Even if I do something, and I don't know, you may find this in your business, like, the formula for doing some problem solving, and it should, like, I've done this a million times, and it's never the same. It's just, everything is, a little different.
Yeah, the same inputs don't always give you the same outputs, for sure.
Right, yeah. But I've learned a lot from the artists that are my colleagues, and we're very supportive. The ones that are, we've had 10, 20-year relationships. So we kind of look out for each other, and we've helped each other in business to sell work, to make contacts with other people that are looking for work. So in that way, it's been, good.
So when did you start Lilly Press?
I started Lilly Press in 2005, sort of officially. I was still teaching part-time, and but I ended up, we moved into this house. My studio is in my home. And I've always had a studio like this press here is huge. And it was in our basement. It comes apart. It can be taken apart. My husband said, it will never move again. Never say never. So I was renting space outside of my home, and then it was in my home. And then we did a renovation, and we bought this house, and we ended up kind of building, this almost like a second house, but I've got the better space. I've got more space than my husband. But my husband we were in the 90s in Washington, D.C. We'd moved here after he got out of school. He's an architect. The market was really bad. There was no jobs in real estate. And he ended up getting a job, hired the Cellular One Southwestern Bell. They were putting all the towers up everywhere for the mobile network. And finally, he was so sick of it, he really wanted to get back into real estate development. And that's when he worked for a developer, and then they let him off and they hired him back as an independent contractor. And we were like, screw it, we're going to take a loan and build this. We're going to do this. And we, took a leap, and it worked out. Okay. It worked out good. Yeah. But, sometimes you're in a place in your life where you just need to take a risk, and so, that's what we did.
What were some of the challenges you ran into along the way?
You mean in terms of like shifting work? I mean, like
just related to the business. So going from
my business. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, art is like, it's a roller coaster. Like you'll have a really, my motto is money coming in and going out as long as it keeps coming in and going out. But there are times when, it's like, oh my God, especially summers, August and summers were bad, and certain months were, tough, and tax time, people don't pay you because people are, there's all these kinds of weird things.
Yeah.
It's just kind of staying the course and just like, okay, we'll pay that credit card down. Well, you take chances, but so it's more like, at times it was feast or famine, and now it's been steadier. But I think because we've been doing it longer, I've been doing it longer, and like, and I also, I have a smaller staff, so I might make a big commission, but I have expenses and materials. So I always like when you get like a big check and you're like, if I could just have this there for a little while and enjoy it, but then eventually, it's like, oh, what happened to that commission? It's so I think, I think the big thing is like, what is your definition of happiness and being financially safe? And the thing is, do you have a roof over your head, and you have food in your house, and you can, pay your bills to get to the, that's, you want to accrue more savings, but it's not always like that because, but,
Yeah. And what I found too is when things get tight with the cash flow, the owner is the first one to make the sacrifice, right? So it has a significant impact on your personal life as well.
Right.
When things aren't going as well, maybe relationships get a little bit more difficult. So it's always, the goal is to get to that stability point. And
but nothing is ever safe, like even if you think you're doing, and that's where you have to be really, I have a lot of gratitude in my life. I try to express it for the good things I have, because, I think that's really important to every day, express gratitude for the good things that I have, because so many people don't. And I mean, it's just recently that I look around me and you see a lot of people having a hard time, or, your kids, or you're trying to keep things in balance, and it's hard. But, I think one day at a time, and just, that's my motto. As long as the money comes in and goes out, it keeps coming in, there's flow.
What are some things as you built the business you think you did really well that are kind of the keys to your success?
I hire a lot of young people, and because I really can't afford like a full-time person. But what I do is I've hired a lot of young kids to do video editing. And so they get the opportunity to have experience of producing a documentary. And then they have like a resume that they've worked somewhere, and it helps them. Like, I believe in giving back. So that's my way of, helping that. And I always pay them. There's a lot of internships in places around the country, especially within the art field, where it's just labor, and they don't pay you. I think is criminal. So I always do that. I don't know. I think I'm really organized. I think I'm very neat. People come in my studio and they go, "It's so clean in here. It's so neat," and all I do is move things. Everything's on wheels, so I can model my space to what I need. So I'm constantly cleaning and keeping things straight. And I think organization is a really important key to success because, you know, I need to know where things are,
Yeah.
you know, and I've gotten better at it over the years, and especially with, I don't know if it's a little OCD in there. I didn't think I was, but I might be. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's interesting how much of a difference just the appearance when you walk in a place that it's cared for makes with the clients.
Yeah.
As even when we switched offices at one point, and I just had one office for myself, and because I had all my paperwork in there, it
Right.
wasn't as clean as I wanted it to be. But now that we've got a little bit more space, we have a place to put things.
Mhm.
My desk is generally, not always, but generally pretty clean, and clients walk in here, and you can feel the difference in their opinion of me and the firm when they walk into a organized, well put together place, as opposed to papers kind of everywhere or things on the floor. And
Right.
it's a big difference. It's a differentiator, I think, between a lot of different
Right.
industries.
Yeah. Well, like a lot of times too, artists think that we're just, getting drunk, smoking cigarettes and throwing paint around, which some people, but most people are, really, you have to be a good business person. I mean, you have to be, presentable. And I always try to look nice. And when I go out, if I'm going out into the business world, like if I'm going to an event, I mean, I always try to dress nice. And because, your appearance, how you feel about yourself is how people are going to see you. And so I think that's true, what you're saying, that someone coming into your business, if it looks, not well kept, they're like, well, are they going to take care of me? Are they going to, maybe it doesn't bother some people. And then I also have had some businesses. I have some printers that are commercial printers. They have fabulous big warehouses, and not everything's perfect, but there's an organization to it,
Right.
So, you can have, not saying you have, but, but I think that's important, looking professional.
Yeah. Yeah. And in that industry specifically, a lot of people may not think that that's as important because it's not as professional of an industry as an accounting firm.
Mhm.
But I think in that case, that's really what can separate you, because people take you, no matter what industry you're in, whether it's right or wrong,
Mhm.
if you're dressed appropriately and present yourself the right way, people are just going to take you more seriously.
Yeah, yeah, hopefully, yeah. I mean, a lot of artists, and it's like I have a friend who says it's showbiz, like, and
Right.
she has this saying she says to me, like, when you're going out to sort of, well, it's called throwing yourself in front of the limousine, like don't be afraid to go up and introduce yourself. I mean, the worst somebody can say is, I don't want to talk to you, or,
Right.
and when I taught a lot when I was teaching at the university, professional preparation for kids that were like the Keystone, when they would be graduating to get their portfolios together and going out and presenting themselves in a business way to a gallery or to a university. But I always recommended this thing called an informational interview. So a good way to approach somebody, I found, is people like to talk about themselves. They don't want you to go up and like, look, how can you help me? Like, help me get my work in that gallery. But if you go in and say, I'm really interested on how does this work, ask them, how did you, that's what a lot of my filmmaking is about, is how did you get to where you were? And so find out, like, where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Did you always do this? So if you approach people in a little bit more like really taking interest in their personal, like, how did you do that? They're a lot more
Right.
open. And then you've built this connection. So the next time, if you ask them, could I come and, do you have any part-time work possibly? They're going to go, oh, maybe that person does,
That's good.
or, maybe in your field, like what certain businesses, like how did you establish this business? What is the history, as opposed to like, can I be your accountant?
Right.
But you're laying a little groundwork that
Yeah.
somebody who can just crunch numbers and give them their tax return.
Right. Yeah. I used to tell people, and I don't say it as much anymore, that we're in a relationship business. But the reason I don't say it as much anymore is because every business is a relationship business.
Yeah.
Whether
Yeah.
you realize it or not,
Right.
the relationship is what will help sustain the long-term working
Yeah.
together. So that's a good point.
Well, a really thing that made me, I had to learn about being a business person was, our first neighborhood we lived in, we had a dog. We've always had a dog, and I met my accountant in the dog park, not in the dog, in the park, but I didn't know his account. We were talking, and he was not an accountant, he was a lawyer, like intellectual property. And,
Okay.
and I was telling, just chatting about some ideas I had. He goes, well, you should really legally do this because it protects you. And I was thinking, and, I thought, oh, he goes, what is that? A penny shy, a pound shy, a penny short, or something, like if you don't invest in yourself.
Yeah.
So like I learned from him, it's important to like, trademark my name and my logo, and legally do things correctly, even though people think, oh, no one's going to know that if you do it, because who cares. But always invested in legal business practice, advice, like producing something. I have the attorney file a copyright or trademark, or and contracts too, like hiring people that are independent contractors. He gave me a template for, but I pay him because I don't know
Right.
myself. So
Yeah.
self-protection is pretty important, I think, for
Yeah.
a good business.
Yeah. Paying advisors, and also like some of the stuff may have been in your mind premature to copyright and things like that, but you never know when something's going to blow up on you.
Uh-huh.
And at that point, it's too late to try to put the cat back in the bag. So if you don't have the legal things in place from the start,
Right.
you're putting yourself at such great risk because you really don't know if and when you're going to need those things that you've already put in place.
Right. Right. So that's sometimes where like money goes. I'm like, oh my God. And I've known him like 30 years, and he's expensive now.
Yeah.
Charge me. He goes, don't worry, Susan, I'm only charging you by the minute or something. I'm like, well, good, because I'm not a highfalutin law firm.
Right. Yeah.
But
Especially in the DC area.
anyway, yeah, but
All right, so I think we're just about out of time. The last question I always like to ask is, what advice do you have for somebody that's just getting started in business?
what advice do I have? Well, I think it's important to work in amongst the field that you're interested in being in. And I see a lot of young people that think they're going to go out and get like a $900,000 government contract or something because, the whole buzz with like, blockchain or NFTs and all this kind of stuff. Like they're going to make money fast. And that's,
Right.
to me, that's gambling. And I think those things are possible, but I think you really need to like work for people. You need to work with somebody who knows more than what you're doing, and be, you don't want them to, if you don't like them, like the thing is, if you don't like where you are, you can change it. But I think you need to build a experience base just so that you have, some ideas. But my advice would be is that dreams do come true. If you have a dream, it can really happen, and don't think that it can't, because it can.
That's
And
good.
like, if you're passionate about it, you can sell it to people. Like, I love what I do, and I do a lot of fundraising, and people know my projects are good. And I don't ask all the time, like, a lot of organizations, nonprofits have to fundraise and do that kind of thing. But if I know my idea is good, I have no qualms about asking for help or for money or support. And, don't be afraid to ask, because you don't know. And the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's great advice. It's definitely having passion for it, being bold about what you're doing, and having confidence in yourself goes such a long way in creating a lasting and thriving business. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I would end with my ism that my father told me, and I really miss him. He was very funny, and he said, when he loved to tell jokes, and he goes, you got to know that the joke is funny to you first before it can be funny to somebody else, because if it makes you laugh, it's going to make them laugh. So if you have the passion, the people around you are going to feel it, and they're going to want to be part of it, and that's exciting. So would be my advice. So
that's a great quote to end on. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Susan, for joining us. It was great getting to know you, learning a bit about your journey, and the success that you're having at all the things that you're doing with your art, Lilly Press, and your nonprofit. So thank you again for joining us.
Okay.
And thank you for everybody for watching. This has been another episode of the Businesses Start Here podcast. Thanks again to Susan for joining us. And please, if you have any comments or questions or items you'd like to see us address, or people you'd like to see on the podcast, please let us know in the comments, and we'll do our best to get all that taken care of. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Businesses Start Here podcast. We hope you were inspired and encouraged by today's podcast. We would love to hear your feedback. Please send us an email at podcast@villiotti.com. That's podcast@villiotti.com. And be sure to share, like, and comment all of our content.